what I've decided to focus on today is more on methodology and practice and technique for a particular kind of work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about theory to give you sort of a base. But I just wanted, I think it's nice to get some practical implication about how something actually works and how you may, later on in your training or when you're in internships or in your own practice, how you may use some of these things to help clients. Okay. So I came up with the concept of object relations therapy with fewer words, because what I'm going to talk about today and show you is sort of techniques that work with less talk and a little bit more with the individual person's memories, their internal resources, their images that come up inside of them, their affect and their feelings. And when I explain it to you, what you'll see is that sometimes someone will come up with a memory in their body or an image in their body that they'll go right to, instead of having to tell you a half-hour story about what happened. And not that I don't think telling the story about what happened is a very important thing, because it is. But in working with this particular kind of way, you can kind of get to the meat of something that's going on with fewer words and ways to rework it. Okay? So, how many of you know what object relations is, sort of in a broad sense? Okay. And how would you describe it?
Oh, don't ask me.
Oh, well,
that's why I'm here. Make it clear.
So you don't want to tell me? No, but just what
clear.
your understanding, if you don't mind. It's okay, just a ballpark little.
I guess it's in context to attachment theory.
Yeah, yeah.
How one would perceive themselves in another as an object. I know there's a lot more to say about that. But
That was cool.
Yeah.
That was concise. Anyone else want to add to that? It's not a test. It's just important that we kind of get a sense of what you think, because then I'll talk more or less on object relations.
The relationship between the person with another, then it's basically referred to as a love object, and how that relationship has developed, or what basically what is going on in that relationship,
right. Or the result of that
yeah.
relationship. Okay. Anyone else want to just throw a little something in? All right. I got you. I'll throw a little something. Okay. So I'm just going to broaden it this way. That many current presenting problems of clients, and what I mean by presenting problems are the things that come to therapy with, have origins, which is no great shakes to you, in past experiences. So I'm just going to give you a real quick one. So let's say you're met someone and you're excited about them. In fact, you're kind of hot for them or whatever, right? And they give you their number and you give them your number. And of course now they probably email, I'm back in the dark ages, but anyway. So they leave you a message on your phone. And you get all excited. And they say, hi, blah, 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 blah. It's really cool meeting you. I just wanted to talk with you. And some people will call their friends and go, oh, so-and-so called me. You know, I left the number for them. And they call me right away. And what they said was, I just wanted to say hello to you and figure out, you know, maybe what's going on and if. What do you think that means? And people look at them like, what do you mean, what do you think it means? Well, what do you think it means? Well, if you kind of heard their voice. You know, their voice was kind of like distant, but they were kind of excited and they were kind of elusive. What do you think it means? Do you think they want to go out with me? Do you think they like me? Right? So we start to do all these trips, right? Some of us do. And some of us don't do trips at all. So it's kind of the comment, that's cool, right? But a lot of us have had those trippy moments. Or you could even say in a classroom with a particular professor that they'll say something back to you when you ask a question and you're not quite sure what they think of you by the way they said it, because there's a tone in her voice. Okay? So you relate to that as well? Okay, I might do that in here, but I'm only going to be here for an hour and 15 minutes. It's okay. So a lot of that, the one that I picked initially, really does have to do, that excitement and that uncertainty really does have a lot to do with past experiences and the way you perceive your worth and your value and what you're longing for. And it may be very unconscious or it may be very conscious, but that sense of expectancy comes from somewhere. So I'm going to go back to that example when we start to talk about the practice a little bit. So in these presenting problems that have origins in past experiences, they can come up in a set of beliefs that a person has, the affect that they're experiencing, the cognitions they have. Also, what can happen is that there can be a fusion, I'll explain that in a minute, of a new experience with an old trauma. And trauma I'm going to just relate as loose, as a loose word. So trauma meaning whatever the person experiences as they think of traumatic. I'm not talking about sexual abuse or being beaten, any of those things, although those are traumas, okay? And fusion basically means that these old things get locked in the brain as one experience. And the experience causes distress. And what the person is unable to do often is separate out the current thing that's happening from the old one. And therefore, the distress gets greater. Are you following me kind of on that? So what might be an example of that you can think of?
My mom didn't pick me up in 3rd grade after school when she was supposed to, and someone missed an appointment last week. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I'm going to just give you an example, like on a broader example where there are multiple traumas, and I don't mind using myself, not out of narcissism, but just out of it's just greater to pick an example. So when I was a little boy, very little, like infant-wise, so my mother had her tubes tied after she had me because there were 6 kids and she had it. This was going to be her last kid. So the doctors lanced her kidney and she didn't know that. Okay. And she got really sick, so she was taken away from me for a long period of time in my early childhood, which is a lot of the attachment bonding time, right? But I'm going to jump way ahead. So I, needless to say, had some abandonment issues to work out. Some other kid might fare better than I did, but there was some attachment abandonment things. So in the 1980s, I had a lot of friends die because it was part of the HIV epidemic. And I'm not the only one who had a lot of friends die. I had a lot of friends die. Which was pretty traumatic because of just that happening, but also the attachment to old abandonment stuff. It felt even bigger. But when I'm going to take your point, what's your first name again?
Doris.
So at that time, I was extremely vulnerable, and I can exactly remember this woman of mine, this good friend of mine, called me to cancel a lunch. And I was nutsy too. So I had lots of affect, lots of thoughts, and my belief, and when, because of the distress, my need was immediate. And it was like, well, if you're not gonna have lunch with me now, then I'm not gonna get my needs met. I'll never get my needs met. It's just one more loss. It's just one more person not showing up. What am I gonna do today with myself? So that was all from somebody canceling lunch. I better not. That's why would I be up here? But anyway, the point is, at the time, that was all from someone canceling lunch. So what I mean by that, it was a fusion of old traumas locked together with just a new experience in the brain, and all of a sudden it was like that lunch represented a lot more because I could not separate out. Okay? So later on when we start to talk about the treatment and the way to work with it, you'll see what I mean. Okay, so just kind of hold on to that for a minute, okay? So, and the whole sense of object relations is that if you have healthy and consistent attachments in your early development, they lead to one great ability in particular.
Oh,
They lead to one great ability in particular. And that ability is the ability to self-regulate. And self-regulating is no easy task. Right? It's like managing priorities. But self-regulating is like, can our psyche hold itself and regulate itself? It's sort of like the way I try to look at it, and it's a good way to kind of think of it maybe when you're working with adults, is if you can imagine, you know, like a teeter-totter, you know what those are? I don't know in today's world how far things go back. But, you know, with the teeter-totter, if somebody gets too far on one level, the other person goes way up, right? And the other one goes down. So the self-regulator is like the internal ability to modulate that and to be able to live with what goes down and what goes up. And somehow you still have a base there and your psyche is still able to hold you. Okay? And the other thing is that you are able to contain your experiences. That means you have a holding place inside of yourself for your experiences. And a steady enough internal sense of well-being. So I didn't say a constant, but just a steady enough internal sense of well-being. And if all that happens, hopefully, or depending on how that happens, these are things that you might want to write down, will determine our emotional regulation. If you don't understand terms, let me know. Our experience of defense structures, our reactivity to internal and external stimuli, and also, depending on this kind of regulation and how it all worked out, we'll see the manifestation and what I mean by this is how a human person experiences their fear. And fears will show up in anger, in sadness, in self-doubt, in obsessive thought, in depersonalization. These are just some examples. And a reactive way of soothing. So the last part would be a reactive way of soothing. And so, how many of you have ever found yourself in the kitchen walking back and forth eating? Have you ever done that? Okay, somebody maybe not have, some people have. And you're kind of just eating, right? And you're eating for some particular reason. And you're almost watching yourself go back and forth eating because you're just trying somehow to soothe something, to regulate something, to get something back, okay? So the reactive soothing may turn out, these are just some ways they may manifest, in eating or lack of eating, in drinking, meaning alcohol, that kind of stuff, in rumination of thought, in obsessions, or in retreating. So somebody might retreat or pull back. So the last thing I just want to say about object relations, and then we'll get to some examples on how to work with this kind of stuff, because it was important to set a premise, for me to set some kind of premise. So object relations is a developmental psychological theory. Developmental meaning what?
It shifts throughout.
It shifts throughout
lifespan.
time, right, and through a lifespan, exactly. And it also, the basic for that development is based in, oops, there goes the pen, an attachment. And basically the principle and the whole thing is that if our early caretakers show up consistently enough, compassionately enough, mirroring us enough, are regular enough, are repetitive enough, are kind enough, mirror our feelings enough, feed us enough, but don't overdo it and smother us, and don't underdo it. So we're really talking about some kind of good enough parent or caretaker, right? That it results in our ability to have a contained psyche or sense of self that has measured, this is the way I like to think of it, measured capacity of resiliency. I can never spell that word right. It's R-E-S, pardon me. Resiliency. And that we also have an internal surety of well-being. So that somehow the ending result is that we're sure enough, a sure enough sense of our well-being. Doesn't mean we can't be rocked. It just means that we have something to come back to, which is us, which is something you really can't see. It's not something that you come back to in your body, it's something that you come back to in here. And I think it's really, when you think about it, it's quite beautiful. That there is this thing inside of ourselves that we can come back to, that is a knowing in a sense that holds us safely enough. Some people in the spiritual realm might call that God. Some people might. But in the psychological realm, I'm calling it just a sense of a steady self. Okay? Why does psychology teach you to breathe all the time in these programs, especially your program? Breathe, breathe, you're always breathing. Why are you breathing? Why do they teach you to breathe in these programs?
To regulate your,
Huh?
to regulate your sense of self.
Yeah, self, and to come back to your body. Breathe, and notice your breath. Because we're going to inundate you with all this information, and then we want you to pull all this stuff apart, and we want you to analyze it, and we want you to be really good at it. We want you to self-reflect, and we want you to write papers over and over and over and over again about the whole process, and we want you to stay steady while you're in the process of it. It's a lot to ask, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you better breathe, so that you can come back to some sense of internal self. Okay. So we've got the kind of basic premise, right? Anybody confused about that? I don't think anybody is. Okay. So what I'm going to do is give you a couple examples of a client who comes in with a presenting problem. I'll try to refer to sort of the concept of attachment and object relations, or ask you some questions, and then just talk about the way of working that I was talking about, the object relations with fewer words. You wouldn't know that because we've been talking the whole time, but there is a way to work with fewer words, okay? So, the other thing is, I just think it's important just to point out, that I learned about this through experiencing it. I've learned about it through reading about it. I've learned about it through using it with clients over and over and over again. And also from my own internal healing from, receiving it. Receiving this kind of work. I also want to say that not everyone's going to be able to feel comfortable doing this as a therapist, nor necessarily should you do it when you're first starting out, unless you really know what you're doing. And the other thing might be that you'll know if a client's going to take to it, because some clients take to it like a duck to water. It's amazing. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about that in just a minute. Okay. So here's a person, okay? So this person's name is Robert. You might want to jot this down, you may not want to. Don't worry about it if you don't want to. Okay. So he comes in, and his presentation is that he's having a relationship problem. And that he's had this relationship problem in the past. And he's been with 3 or 4 other women, and he's in his 30s right now. Okay. So in the sort of standard of sort of modern life, is that a lot of people he's been with, or no, or yes? What would you think?
No.
You say no?
3 or 4 like partners?
Yeah, sexual
Total.
partners.
No.
I would say.
You say no. Okay. So dependent, okay? But that's an important piece that you're saying no, because I'll tell you how this works itself out. So what he's experiencing is a lot of distress when he's with his current girlfriend for several reasons. One is she told him that she had broken up with someone who she was really in love with, and that she got suicidal after she broke up. She had the most passion for him that she's had for anybody in her life. And at the same time, the two of them have fallen in love. His experience is when they're together sometimes, that he experiences himself not being good enough, that somehow her other boyfriend was better than he was. Okay, that's one. And secondly, that she's a whore. So that basically, sort of how he puts it, that she should have saved herself for him. It's a lot, isn't it? Especially the save yourself for him part. I thought, wow. I mean, that's what I'm thinking to myself. Wow, like where did that come, where does that come from? That's pretty deeply rooted. But I'm gonna stick more with the surfacey stuff, okay? Because that's a little too big. Well, I might get there, okay? So his general mood is usually pretty good. Although what happens sometimes when he can't get these thoughts away is he has rumination of thought, which is one thing we talked about before, right? He starts to shut down or retreat, which is something we talked about before, kind of goes away. She notices it, that he's kind of going away. And he also experiences profound sadness. So those are the 3 things he experiences, okay? The other thing that's important, that you just kind of write these things just to remember, he doubts, this is just important, he doubts question for him. He believes, because remember we talked about beliefs before, that their relationship should have all aspects of romantic love. And I don't know where these aspects came from, but they came from somewhere. And again, that I said before, that she should have saved herself for him. Okay. So I want to come over here and just write down real quickly, what did I say his symptoms were that he was experiencing?
Sadness, rumination.
Profound sadness, okay. Profound sadness, rumination,
Shuts down.
shuts down.
Doesn't feel he's good enough.
Good, yeah, I just had that written on my paper. I'm just gonna look for it. Inadequate, or he's not good enough. Okay. Okay, so that's mostly the things that he feels. And then there's also triggers. So, and the triggers are sometimes when he's having sex with her and he is in the house, there was a picture that he and she got together that's on the bedroom wall. He gets totally distracted. And he starts getting all upset. And he starts thinking of the person again because the picture becomes a symbol.
It was while they're having sex.
Yeah. So the picture becomes a symbol. Okay? So, in talk therapy, what might you do?
All of that, what you've told us.
All of what?
I mean, well, doesn't he talk about his distress and
Mm-hmm. So but how might you do it in talk therapy?
Supportive listening.
Supportive listening,
Reflecting,
reflecting back, asking questions,
expanding
expanding
the conversation.
the conversation. You might get a story of, has this ever happened to you before? How long has this happened? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm not saying I didn't do that. I did do some of that, right? So, but I want to tell you, in terms of that, working with some other things, I asked him what feels worse right now. And the thing was, one of the things was the profound sadness and the inadequacy. That's what was up. Okay? So this is how I work. And I wrote this stuff down for you so you don't have to write the rest of this down, so unless you want to. Okay. So it's actually better if you put your pens down, if you don't mind. Do these flip? Oh, they do. You want to flip them? You don't have to, but it's kind of nice if you flip them. Yeah, put them up or whatever. So, I know you didn't want me to sit down since you're filming. Okay. So when I'm working with someone, first of all, like you're in this room and the room's a container and they're telling you what's going on for them, right? Okay. So how I begin to work somatically with them or to go inside. So first of all, I just want to back up for a little bit. The sadness and the inadequacy, part of what I'm trying to find out is, how old is it? Does it come from an old place of attachment or fear? Are there any past traumas that might come up that have been associated with this? Are there other feelings that come up with it? Are there any other places in his life that he experiences this sense of inadequacy? Does it come up in other places or not? These are all kind of thoughts that we might have in our heads, right? Or things we want to find out about. So with working with that, with him, the first thing I did was ask him, which you don't have to do, but you could if you wanted to, if you experience it, is just to kind of close his eyes if he could do that and go inside. And so what I would have a client do is close their eyes and see if they could go inside. And that's basically the first thing I would do. And then, you don't have to close your eyes, you can open if you want. And then the next thing I would say is to start out, where do you experience the sadness in your body right now? And most people can locate where the sadness is. Can locate where the sadness is. So the first thing you want to do when you're working with people is see if, there's several things I want to say to you about this. Some people can't close their eyes. It's threatening. So that'll tell you right there and right then, this methodology is not going to go too big. In the very beginning, because you're going to have to start slower. And the slower is going to have to be building some kind of adequate trust with them that they can actually go inside and close their eyes and tolerate that. Okay? And I'm jumping here, but because I'm going to get back to it a little later. The other thing is what you want to see is how able are they to tolerate what they experience. So remember I talked about the seesaw and developing the steady state inside and a sense of well-being. What you're trying to figure out is how able are they to hold that and what kind of reaction they have to it. So if they can tell you, I often have the person then put their hand where they experience it. Some people will go here, some people will go here, some people will go here. Okay? And then I'll just see if they can be with it. That's one. The next thing that I would do with a person is, does that sadness, there's several ways I could go about it. So one thing I might say is, does the sadness have an image? And I have to tell you that I'm not like making it up like, this is like some kind of magic or something, right? When someone's able to do it, the image comes up just like that. It's not a struggle. It's not a struggle. So the difference between the image and the talk therapy, and I'm going to give you the image first of all. So the image he came up with was being on the playground at age 7, trying to play with the other kids and feeling strange and inadequate and not capable and different than the other boys. And that somehow he just didn't feel safe enough. So the image was right on the playground. So if we want to tie things, that inadequacy is old. It goes way back. And it also, if you want to tie it to somewhat of a trauma, part of the trauma was probably, which I'm going to get to in a minute, was being made fun of.
This one?
Being made fun of. So then when I asked him, the next question would be, so he's got the image, there's several ways of working. Is there anything older than that comes up? Is that your first memory or is there another memory? Okay. So for him, that was, at that time, his earliest memory. So what you want to be able to do when working with this kind of work is, can the person just be with the image? So now I'm going to just stop that for just a second. And what did I say in the very beginning? I know I said a lot, but about object relationship. Object relations was if the caretaker can show up enough, be there enough, mirror enough, be consistent enough. So what you're doing when you're sitting with the image, with the client, is being there enough, being compassionate enough, showing up enough, and allowing. You're helping the client allow that experience to be with compassion. Okay? So he could have told me the story for a long, long time about being on the playground when he was a little kid, he'd be picked on. Then it would happen when he was playing. That could take 15 minutes. There's nothing wrong with it, but it could take 15 minutes. And where is most of that coming from? Up here. It's in the brain. It's coming from up here. It's not coming from down here. It's coming from up here. It's all attached in the mouth, which is nothing wrong with that, right? But when you go to the image, you come right down to it and you get into the body. So then the next step in that might be, there's a couple ways of working. What does the little boy need? And this is where it gets tricky. For some people, they'll know right away. The little boy needs to be taken out of there, might be one. The little boy needs to know he feels good enough, might be two. The little boy needs a friend. So I said to him, well, what happened to the little boy? Can you remember what happened to the little boy? So the next thing he told me about the image he had was that he went home and he experienced this deep sadness and would go in his room and would not tell his mom or his dad or anyone else that he felt that way. So he pretended, like a lot of people do. They pretended. And in the house, when I did ask a little bit more, like how available was your mom to the little boy to talk to about that kind of stuff? My parents didn't like to talk about stuff like that. So he was able to say that. Okay. So you following me or tracking me so far? Yeah.
I just have a question about, because I like the use of the images and stuff, but is he then speaking
Yeah.
of these images? Like, are you walking him through this, like, okay, imagine that, and then is he then telling you this, or is he?
So I'll tell you how it works.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, because that's good, because I'm confused I can see. So basically, all I'm gonna do is sit down, be with him, ask him what image comes up, right? And then I might ask him to be with the image, and when he wants to, he can open his eyes. Then I might ask him just a regular question. You know, what would happen to the little boy? Can you go back inside? He'd say, like, I can see myself going back into the house and being by myself. What's he feeling? You know, and then we would stop. Okay? And then that awareness would come up. Okay. So, the next step would be, what, like I said before, what does a little boy need? So basically what you're trying to do is to bring a resource to the little boy who feels sad, or who feels hurt, or who feels inadequate, okay? And this is what we want to find out, so I'm just taking one other step here. Can he find a resource? If he can't find a resource, that probably means there's more attachment damage. Because there's not enough self to grab a resource, or he can't even imagine bringing someone in, because there's no one there. So that probably means the abandonment was greater. Okay? These are other couple things I want to say. If he can show up, meaning the adult self for the little boy, we're in great shape. Why is that?
Shows he has good ego strength.
Yeah, some great ego strength, enough of him to show up for himself. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like when you self-talk or tell yourself to calm back down or to get out of the kitchen or whatever, you have enough ego strength to get you out of it, you can go back and focus. Okay? So it really tells you, okay, so in this particular case, I asked him, can you imagine someone coming to the little boy? And he said, I can. And so then I had him imagine coming to the little boy and just kind of being with him. Okay. So that way it cuts down on the loneliness. It gives comfort for the sadness. And then I asked them, can you tell the little boy anything? That might be the next step. So he may go inside and tell the little boy something, and the next thing you would say, how does he respond? So if he doesn't believe it, we have more work to do. Correct?
Yeah.
The little boy doesn't smile, the little boy doesn't believe it, the little boy shakes his head. Okay, we have more work to do. If the little boy kind of feels safer, then it's like, okay, something's connected. You following me so far?
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop right there for just a minute, okay? So, this was all in one particular session, okay? 40, 50 minutes. I don't work more than 50 minutes, sometimes 45. Okay, so we traveled quite a distance, wouldn't you say? So I found out some stuff about his childhood. I found out all the stuff about him not feeling adequate at school, adequate in that way and being picked on. I found out a little bit more about his home life, although he did feel safe at home because he had a room to go to and stuff like that. And then I found out about his internal resource, because he could show up for himself, okay? So there's a lot of information gathering just by being able to be there, because he could tolerate it, okay? So when breaking this kind of work down a little bit more, you kind of want to do piece by piece. And first of all, as I'm going to go back and just say it again, if they can tolerate closing their eyes, that's a beginning. If they can name what's happening inside, that shows some body awareness, correct? Or some experience of the body, of the self. Because it's very different that if they can't, because then it's still all up here, which isn't bad, it's just up here, right? If they can come up with an image, it's like a memory. And if they can come up with a soothing place, it's like something that comes and comforts, that connects, that attaches, that brings back to balance. Okay. So now I'm going to leap a little bit. So if we go back and kind of think about the continuum that I talked about before, about traumas locking up. So part of what's happening, by her telling him about how great her other lover was, which was, I think, not a good idea. Just between me and the gay post, going out for the first 6 weeks and telling her how much passion she had for this other guy means that she was trying to work something out herself, right? But that can be a little unnerving to somebody, right? Some people are tough. They go, cool, that was fun, because it's not threatening, but to him that was pretty threatening, okay? And he didn't forget it. He held on, it locked, okay? But the inadequacy part, locked up with past experiences or past traumas. Understand what I'm saying there? So then where he gets locked is with the old thing and the new thing. And when you get locked, you get kind of frozen. And then you shut down. And then he goes away. Kind of get what I mean? Okay. So that's what I mean by, in terms of the going inside and locking up things. So part of going inside and part of identifying those things is to begin to unlock. So that the little boy gets what he needs, and then we can start working on what the adult needs. Make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, I just want to just point this out. Talking would take a lot longer. That's all I have to say. To get to all that through talking is going to take a lot longer. So I could say something like this. Oh, so that happened to you when you were a little boy. That sounds really sad. Can you imagine bringing a resource to the little boy? Can you talk to the little boy right now and tell him it'll be okay? Because if we can do that, what we'll be able to do is, then you can comfort the little boy, and then we can work on the adult. Is that doing anything? It might be educating, but it would take a long time to get there. Where if you can get there this way, you go right to the place. Okay? The other thing I wanted just to bring up was, he came in the following week and he was just upset with himself because it had happened again during the week, and he was just frustrated. And so I asked him just to kind of go inside and see what was coming up. He cried for about 4 minutes. Just weeping and weeping and weeping and weeping, just bent over kind of weeping. And the difference between him and another person was, he wasn't afraid of it. Like, some people cry and weep, you can see that they're actually afraid of the depth of pain. He wasn't. He was able to contain and hold the depth of the pain. And then I had him go to an image, because he couldn't quite, and the image was this time, was even more that I found out about him, was that he was on the baseball team, which, again, and I'm kind of jumping here, but the baseball team tells me One, he had enough ego strength as a kid, he wasn't feeling that inadequate that he could be on the baseball team and he could manage it. Some kids would just run away and hide and not get him through the team. Maybe he had to, but he did it, okay? So he was on his way to school, and one guy on the baseball team pushed him down on the ground, covered him, he was covered then in mud, and threw some water on him. And he went running. The kid went running. So the kid had to get up, he was 12 then, he had to get up and walk, because it was practice, and he had to show up in front of everyone, and everyone started laughing at him because the kid told everybody what they did. Okay, pretty traumatic, right? So that's also where he has the inadequacy, but he also has a sense of humiliation. And part of his humiliation also was triggered by her saying that the other guy was so good. And humiliated, which is kind of saying you're not quite as good enough. Right? Okay. So what I'm trying to let you know is that every time we kind of did this, we got to another layer. And then you would come in and try to have a corrective experience, someone to come and show up for the little boy, someone to come and help the little boy. Okay. Or for you as a therapist to have compassion and help him hold what happened. What he's saying, well, no wonder. No wonder in some parts of your life you feel so powerful, and in this part of your life you feel so inadequate. Look what happened. And so there's something about being with her and something about being with the knowledge of this other guy that makes you go way back. Okay. So then part of the work is being able to be with the kid and then learn how to be with the adult. Okay? Does that make sense to you? Okay. I'm going to teach you 2 more steps and then I'll give the handout out. And we can, do you have any questions for me or any? Yeah.
Is the word unlocking a term that's used in a system, or is that the word that you
I picked it up.
You did, okay.
Well, traumas, well, actually, like in EMDR, when you know what EMDR is?
That's what I was
Okay,
thinking.
yeah, they talk about traumas lock up
Oh.
together, so I'm just borrowing the words.
Oh, okay.
So trauma kind of unlocks, okay?
Yeah.
Trauma kind of unlocks. Okay. So I'm just gonna give you, because I just want to tell you a little bit about a couple other techniques to work with stuff like this, so that, that we can talk about a couple other techniques that you can use in terms of going inside and working with some of the things we put up, fear, anxiety, whatever, okay? So, I'm just gonna go around the room real quickly, if you don't mind. Is there anything you're afraid of? Anxiety, what does that mean? That's a big broad word.
Heart palpitations.
Okay, so you get it in the body, okay?
Same.
Okay. Anybody else? So I might experience anxiety by sort of free-floating anxiety, just feeling kind of nervous, but not quite knowing why. You know, just kind of, or I might feel a little distant from myself, like, you ever experience sort of like you're there, but you're almost like watching it rather than being there?
Mhm.
You ever experienced that? It's like, you know, so some people experience it. That was the depersonalization I talked about a minute ago. So the concept of fear is a big one, because fear really blocks us from actualizing or getting stuck inside, okay? So this is one technique that I just wanted to talk to you about. So in terms of going inside, I'm going to take the example of the kid pushing him down in the baseball. Okay, the baseball and mud all over him, you know, and getting up. So what you can do is, you can do something like this. Can you imagine putting a plexiglass, is what I say, or plexus glass, between you and the kid? Okay, or you and the team, you know, they go back to school. Can you imagine like that there's a shield between you and, okay. do you want to say to them? What do you want to tell them? Or what does it look like on this side? So in other words, they're not going to get to you because this glass is here. What does it look like over here? Okay, that's one. Okay. So what do you do when you're putting the shield there? What concept do we have?
Protection.
You're protecting from the self, from that core self that we talked about in object relations, that psychological self that develops. It's sort of protection. You're also allowing it to be distant enough, so you're removing it, right? And then when you're saying, what would you like to say, you're finally giving this kid a voice. And most people are able to find something if you put the glass there for them to say. So they're giving voice, standing up for a part of them that they couldn't stand up for before, which builds strength. Okay? Some people can't do that, but it's it's just big enough for them to sit there, feel safe enough, and just see the image. You understand what I'm saying? So that, let's say your future image is about getting a job, right? Or
Okay.
feeling anxious or something like that.
Yeah,
So we have to go too much into it.
let's do it.
No. So anyway, you might close your eyes and you might see something on the other side of that that's really freaky. Like, I'm just saying this kind of stuff. You could be alone and by yourself and not having a safe place to live on the other side of that. Or you could be a therapist with a shingle and have no clients. You could feel old and be sick, and so you see that on the other side. Okay? So it gives some distance between you and that part of yourself. And sometimes just having the distance allows the anxiety to reduce. Because somebody can see when they experience the anxiety that they can actually separate that part out of themselves from the fear. And then they have this part of themselves intact. Does that make sense to you? So that's sort of another way of working with it. Then, I don't know if this time is going to go so fast. Then the last thing that I'm going to just show you another technique, and then I'll pass the techniques out, is I'm going to go back to the original image without confusing you. So I see this client who goes inside and he feels sadness. He can locate the sadness, and he feels inadequate. And it's old, because it's about 8 years old, right? So then what I'll say to the client is, what do you believe? What's the belief that you have about all this? So if you don't mind me using you for a second, your belief about your thing is, oh my God, I'm going to be old and poor and I'm not going to make it. I'm just saying that could be the belief. Not to upset you, but that could be the belief, right? Mine could be, I'm going to be, you know, old and wrinkled. Well, I've already got the wrinkled parts. I just got the old part. But anyway, so it could be whatever it is, okay? And then you ask, you know, so to put the belief, and you say to the person, can you imagine seeing that projected on a blackboard? So I'm going to write this one. I am inadequate and not good enough for my partner. Okay. So you kind of ask them, can you project that out, and can you kind of see that written somewhere else? Okay. And then you say, if you look at that, how true do you think that is right now? And 70 or 80% of the time, it's not too true. Because once you've sorted out this from this, somebody will look at that and go, well, it's possible that that's true, but I don't know how true that really is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or like, I'm going to be old, I'm not going to have money, I'm not going to have a job. You might project it out and you see the fear out there. The belief might be that that's true, but how true that is and how likely that might be, maybe something that's coming from something old. And the real answer is, I don't know, there's a 50-50 chance. So again, you're separating out, do you understand what I'm saying? The old from the present and challenging how real that is. Okay? Make sense to you? Okay. So that's another technique that you can use. So I just wanna, I'm gonna pass out the techniques to you so that you can take them with you, so you don't have to take notes on that kind of stuff, just so that you have all that kind of stuff with you, because I just wanted you to be able to have that to tap into if you ever wanted to use them sometimes. So there's, in this way of working, I just kind of want to summarize. There's a lot of things that get looked at. One is your past. Secondly, are what images and beliefs, cognitions you hold in your body. Where might things come from? Being present with them, which means being able to contain them, be with them, be witness to them, just hold the experience. Because if you go back to the kid who might have been afraid, or the mother who couldn't, or the father who couldn't show up enough, they couldn't be with. So, you know, it's you could look at it as from a Zen point of view as well. It's being with what is. Now. Being with what is now. And also trying to be with maybe what was in the past. Okay? The other thing you're doing is, in this particular way of working, is you're challenging belief systems. So if you want to push it out, right, you're saying, like, you know, you could say you're also a cognitive behavioralist because you're working on the belief systems that are attached to the experiences. And you're kind of challenging in a very kind way, is how real is that now? And then the other thing you're trying to do is develop new resources for old ways of being.
Develop new what?
Resources, internal resources. So, you know, when we talked about bringing something to the kid or bringing something to the experience right now, we're trying to develop new resources, which is new ways of managing or coping. So, it doesn't really matter what the symptom is. I mean, it does matter. I mean, it could be anxiety, it could be sadness, it could be depression, it could be compulsive thought, it could be rumination. What you want to do is try to stop the symptom enough to get to the root, to separate out the old from the new, and to learn how to be with it in a way that soothes it. So hopefully, the fear on the other side of the plexiglass, whatever's causing it, won't be so ominous. And there'll be more containment, and the person can come back to that seesaw and be back in balance. Covering a lot of territory, I know, but that's the concept. So whether you call it attachment theory, whether you call it transpersonal work, whether you call it, you know, cognitive behavioral and beliefs, whether you call it Eastern philosophy, we're all doing the same thing. It's just a question of the way you want to do it, right? And I find that some people, I won't say we're totally doing the same thing, because some people are more hard-nosed than others, you know, but, or hard in how they work with it, or more distant. And also, but we're all trying to basically do the same thing to help people to get back, okay? And then just the last thing I want to say is, and it's just my belief, is that, you know, the practice of psychotherapy without faith of some kind is an empty science. Just an empty science. Because there has to be some engendering of some kind of faithfulness in the world, in yourself, in other people, in your capacity, in the capacity of the healer. You know, psychotherapy without faith is pretty hard to do. So somebody may feel hopeless inside, so you want to like engender faith. But I also mean that I think people that have some spiritual practices which help hold them, as long as they're not the kind of practices that limit them, really help. And they're kind of borrowing from some of those principles.
Yeah.
But some people don't take to the tapping and the back
eye.
of the eye stuff, yeah. So it's a gentler way,
So
okay?
you could do it with them.
Right. And then, I'm glad you brought that up. The other thing is that, like, people with poor attachments, like, you know, people maybe in the spectrum of, I don't know, I can use this thrown out terms, but like sort of more the characterological personality kind of stuff. You know, safety is really important, and developing enough self to be able to go inside and just be with the experience, maybe all you need to start to do. You know what I mean? Because you're trying to build enough self to hang with it. So it might be piece by piece by piece, where the person can't bring a resource or can't show up or can't even find the image. Or the person feels so empty inside. You know, I had one man, you know, it was like he was in a cave. And there was nothing in the cave. And that's what he experienced himself a lot. It has as nothing. Which tells you something about his sense of self, right? So I had him begin to bring what we'd like to put in the cave to be more comfortable. Instead of getting out, first we had to bring some things to get in there, you know? So that was a thought that came up. Is there something you could put in the cave with you? And that might be too scary, you know? So there's all kinds of ways to work. And it's not magic tricks. I just want to tell you, this is not imagery. I don't guide them. I don't tell them what to look for, because I don't believe in that. For myself, it's just if somebody tells me to put that in there, or it's like, oh no.
Was this a
Yeah.
was this a real client?
All these people are real
Okay.
clients.
Can I
Yeah,
ask,
yeah, uh-huh.
were they diagnosed? Did you diagnose them?
Mhm.
No.
This particular client I didn't diagnose, because I really couldn't come up with something that was on, yeah, it's certainly not in the characterological realm, certainly not PTSD, because I thought there might be sexual abuse or something like that, but there wasn't.
No borderline at all, no?
Little narcissism, but no real borderline traits, no, because of the holding of self. There's no raging, there's no splitting, the splitting of the object of her, but he doesn't act it out on her, so.
I was
it's
just
really
curious
borderline.
about the wanting her to wait for him, please.
Well, I'm curious about that too.
That
We
was
have-
like,
we-
that was a lot.
That was kind of, yeah, that was
seems like
really.
that would be too
Oh, yeah,
much
that was
for-
something else,
yeah.
I'll tell you that much. So, I did talk then,
Thank you.
I have to tell you.
You went.
I did talk then.
Oh.
I did say something like, you live in the real world. And in the real world, people have things before them and after. And this is where you both are now.
Mm.
So it's almost like you're expecting her to be a teenager and you to be a teenager. But you're in the real world. He didn't like that. He told me he didn't like it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but that's the truth.
I'm sure he didn't.
It was like he's projecting his own
Yeah,
inadequacies
he was,
on
yeah,
that.
exactly, yeah. You're excellent. You're
What about
excellent.
the picture?
You're excellent.
The picture.
Wow, I came up with that one too. That's very good. You ought to come to my office and help out. The other thing on the lighter way is sometimes it's a lot less holding for the therapist. When you have them go inside, it buys you a little distance. Not coldness, but I mean, if you always have to be the good enough mother like Buddha, but it's exhausting. It really is, where if you can ask them to go inside, you can breathe for a few minutes yourself. I'm just being honest.
If you're doing more work than they are, then that's.
Yeah, and you can kind of back up and let them find the image and like, thank God, find the image. Slow. No, it does save you in a way. I'm just being honest. If you have a lot of people, you have to have some resources. Yeah.
A question about blockages, I always ask about blockages, and hopefully this is a quick question,
Yeah.
but Okay, for instance, I got raised by a guy that had no access to his emotions, especially his rage, but he had a ton of rage, especially for the little people. A few years ago, I was thinking, how come I've done a lot of inner work and never internalized a good object? And it finally dawned on me, it's because I know he would hate me to have a good object. I tried to do plexiglass things and they sort of collapsed. It's because somewhere in there they know he wouldn't like me to have protection from what scares me. You know what I'm saying?
I do, yeah.
Have you run into cases like that where some like parent thing is sabotaging the whole therapy process?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I probably have, but I can't, that's it, that's hard, that's really sad. Yeah, that's hard,
Oh,
yeah. I can see that, where it would really be, really difficult if you can't bring in,
Like a
because
step
you're
forward and a step
abandoning,
back.
it's like you're abandoning, the figure, because he wouldn't allow it for you, yeah. And then, the only way that I could see working with that is having the father step aside and go into another room. He can come back if he wants to for right, because what the person's really saying is it's unsafe for me not to have him on some level. I mean, you don't want him in there, but there's also, so what if he stepped aside
I get you.
and then you could allow, then could you allow something to happen? And we can ask him back if you need to, but for right now, can you step aside?
Beautiful.
That's a possibility, to step aside, a lot harder to do.
Also, want
That
to
was
say
very
when you
brave
spoke
of you,
about
that's very
losing,
beautiful.
when you
Very
spoke about
brave.
losing your friends, it
Yeah.
touched me so much that I actually cried, just like you.
That was very, very
I'm sorry to lost
beautiful
you.
of you to say that, and it's very honest, and, I wish you well in that. That's hard, that sounds very hard. So a lot of trauma victims might go through things like that. Anything else? Okay,